Welcome to Sounds of Resistance channel. The war between Russia and Ukraine is in full swing. Both Ukrainian forces and Russian forces are trying to dominate each other on the battlefield. It cannot be said that the Russian forces were very successful in this regard, but the Ukrainian forces have emerged victorious from every battle against the Russians and dominate by inflicting a lot of damage. As its eighth-month war lost momentum, Ukraine's dramatic counteroffensive liberated Luhansk and the Kharkiv region east of Donetsk from Russian occupation. Counterattacks by Ukrainian forces on areas under Russian control continue. Ukrainian forces want to increase their offensive in the Kherson region. This region is of a great importance for the Russian forces. Vladimir Putin wants to annex the region as soon as possible. Along with Kherson, Russia also wants to annex the occupied Luhansk, Donetsk, and Zaporizhia regions. It held fraudulent referendums in all four Russian-occupied territories. It was emphasized that the referendums were condemned as bogus by the international community organizations and that armed soldiers from time to time went from door to door to collect votes. After Vladimir Putin announced that Russia would never give up on them and would defend them with all its means, he signed an agreement to annex the occupied territories. Vladimir Putin's proxies in Ukraine are referred to as his biggest supporters and traitors to Ukraine. The Russian-backed officials appointed by Vladimir Putin to the Kherson, Donetsk, Luhansk, and Zaporizhia oblasts are traitors who represent Putin's presence in the region. These regional officials are referred to as Putin's closest men in the war between Ukraine and Russia. In the past days, at least 7 of the regional separatist officials closest to Putin in Melitopol, Luhansk and Donetsk, and Kherson were destroyed by the Ukrainian armed forces within 48 hours. In particular, Ukrainian Himars artillery blew up the administration building of Russian-backed separatists in Kherson in mid-September and destroyed at least 5 of Putin's men. Also this week, Ukrainian Himars played a leading role in a night attack against Putin's close men, Ukrainian traitors in Kherson. In the Kherson region of southern Ukraine, a Russian military officer was killed in a point strike by Ukraine with the US-supplied high-motion artillery rocket system, HIMARS. Kirill Stremusov, the deputy head of the Moscow-controlled region, stated that Alexei Katerinichev, who served as the first deputy head of the administration of the Kherson region, appointed by Kremlin in charge of security, died as a result of the Ukrainian attack. According to the information obtained as a result of a successful intelligence operation, the Ukrainian force fired 2 M142 HIMARS missiles at a house in the Kherson region. It was found that Alexei Katerinichev was in the house and died. This attack by Ukrainian forces is not the first in which a Russian-appointed official has been killed. However, Alexei Katerinichev was in a very important position for the Russian forces in the Kherson region in terms of his authority and position. It was determined that Ukraine had hit the government buildings used by the Russian authorities in the occupied Kherson region at least 5 times using HIMARS. At least 1 person was killed and others were injured. Ekaterina Gubareva, vice president of the administration established by Russia in Kherson, spoke about a meeting between the heads of the city and municipal districts during the Ukrainian attacks. She was more recently killed in the HIMARS attack on a hotel in Kherson by Alexei Zuravko, a former deputy of Ukraine's Verkhovna Rada. This information was shared by Kirill Stremusov, who was appointed to the Kherson region by the Kremlin government. Ukrainian authorities have not yet commented on the events. Kherson has been under Russian control since the beginning of March. However, Ukraine is conducting a counterattack in the region and has had great success in other counterattack in the Kharkiv region in the northeast of the country, and the Ukrainian forces want to continue their success. Ukrainian forces used the HIMARS supplied by the United States to attack more than 400 Russian targets in the ongoing war. The US has so far handed over 16 of the war-changing HIMARS weapon systems to Ukraine. Behind the success of the Ukrainian forces is the United States of America, which has not spared its support for Ukraine's victory since the first days of the war. Since Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the total amount of aid the United States has sent to Kiev is estimated at $65 billion. Before and during the Ukrainian counteroffensive, the weapons delivered to Ukraine by the United States became indispensable for the Ukrainian army. The United States of America did not take a post on Ukrainian soil as a military manpower, but if we look at the weapons aid Washington sent to Kyiv, we can say that it caused great damage to the Russian forces. Russian President Vladimir Putin stated that, with the partial mobilization decision he announced, 300,000 soldiers would be gathered. However, it is said that more than 300,000 people were conscripted into the military, with the conscription of even Russian citizens who did not meet the criteria in the military registration offices. After the referendums, it will be able to annex Zaporizhia and Kherson in the south as well as the eastern regions, sending newly mobilized troops to a front line that Moscow says is more than 1,000 kilometers long. Russia could also threaten the West if it continues to arm Ukraine with missiles used against what it describes as Russian territory. United Nations Secretary-General Antonio Guterres described the annexation as a dangerous escalation and condemned Russia. Russian President Vladimir Putin had held a referendum in March 2014, retaking the Crimea region from Ukraine, which was widely condemned by the international community. The new referendums are just like a carbon copy of the one held in 2014. The difference of Crimea compared to other regions is that it was captured with very little bloodshed and it came under full Russian control. Parts of the annexed territories are under the control of Ukrainian forces. The territories annexed by Russia constitute 15% of the territory belonging to Ukrainian state. Luhansk and Donetsk, the annexed regions, have been ruled by Russian-backed separatists since 2014. During the 8-month war, Russian forces managed to control only 60% of Donetsk. The Luhansk region is under heavy Ukrainian attacks. The regional capital of Zaporizhia is firmly under the control of Ukrainian forces. Russian forces are attacking the region with long-range missiles. In his annexation speech, President Putin urged Ukraine to cease fire and return to negotiations. But it is certain that Russia will not return the occupied territories to Ukraine. Ukrainian leader Zelensky stated in every statement that a peace treaty would not be made in which the territorial integrity of Ukraine was damaged. The Kremlin government stressed that any attack on the annexed territory will be considered an act of aggression. While Russia continues its annexation process with fraudulent referendums, how does Ukraine react to these events? Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky is doing his best to accelerate NATO membership. This is how Zelensky responds to Russia's annexation movements. At the beginning of the war and in the 8th month it continued, NATO kept its members out of the war in order not to confront Russia and supported Ukraine only with weapons. This attitude of NATO has changed over time. After Russia's annexation decision, NATO member states are more sympathetic to Ukraine's decision to join NATO. The NATO member country that will be the hardest for Ukraine to convince is Turkey. Since a major war is going on inside Ukraine, the Kyiv government will not care about Russia's bogus decisions. Ukrainian forces cannot tolerate losing territory to the Russians. It is known that what calculations Russian President Vladimir Putin made in his head. But after the annexation decisions, the Russian leader started to increase his hate speech against the West. Putin stated that attacks on annexed areas will be considered as an attack on Russia. The detail that is curious about this issue is how Putin will react to the attacks and what the severity of his action will be. Putin has threatened the West to use any means at its disposal to protect Russian soil, including nuclear weapons. Ukrainian President Zelensky considered the nuclear threat made by the Russians an empty phrase that the Russian authorities and propagandists uttered. Although some Western countries want to deter against Russia due to the nuclear threat and energy restriction, this is not a decision they will take alone because NATO is involved. Even if Vladimir Putin's threats are at the level of madness and insanity, the European countries and the alliance are always evaluating the possibility of these threats. However, officials in the Russian State Duma and the Russian Ministry of Defense are trying to bluff or ensure that these threats do not materialize despite Putin. This brings to mind the question of revolution and coup. Right now, the Kremlin and Russia are in great turmoil, and time will tell us what will happen. Thanks for watching.